We are delighted to have the opportunity to share with you our recently published policy brief entitled Bullets Are Cheaper Than Sugar, the Need for New Approaches to the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in the MENA region. The policy brief is available to download on WILPF's website in English and very soon in Arabic as well. We will share with you shortly in the general chat a link to the publication. As WILPF does, we have applied the grassroots informed approach in analyzing what has been achieved in the last 20 years of the agenda, identifying shortcomings and looking at a way forward. With us today is human rights consultant Mirfat Rishmawi, who wrote the policy brief and who will take us through its main findings. With us as well is my colleague Rola Al-Masri and WILPF Secretary General Madeleine Rees. We are also delighted to be joined by feminist leaders and activists from the region who contributed to the report, along with other WILPF partners who were unable to join us. And they will discuss the findings and share their perspectives and educate us all on where to go from here. So a big welcome to Rasha Jarhoum, founder and director of the Peace Track Initiative Yemen, Maria Labde, executive director of Women Now for Development Syria. Thank you all for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And without further ado, over to you, Madeleine, Secretary General of WILPF, to take us through her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I just had a sort of a metaphorical moment. I was kicked off the negotiations, if you like. I was kicked off the Zoom and not able to participate, but was able to gate crash back in thanks to the brilliance of the women on the panel. So there, I think that it's sort of a metaphor for where we are in terms of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We've had 20 years of it. And it's thanks to the brilliant work of women like you who are working with those at the coalface, if you like, really working to build peace in the region, that the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is still alive, because it had all the promise from 20 odd years ago. We had the promise of what it would deliver for women in peacemaking and in governance and in taking societies into different futures. But what we've seen from this report, and I have to congratulate those of you who participated in actually making this real, it shows so clearly how we have not really been able to crack into the essence of what needs to change, because the MENA region is and remains hugely militarized. As we know, when there's militarization, that militarization is very, very gendered. And participation is compromised because women have to compensate for the lack of social economic rights, the lack of investment, the lack of realization of those rights. And yet still, women in the region have been working for peace for decades. And I speak from my own experience of seeing so many women from the MENA region really participating in every multilateral forum there is, in every possibility to try and make sure that they are heard, listened to, and participate in the policies which actually directly impact on their lives and in their regions. Important for the Women, Peace and Agenda from the beginning was it was used as a tool by women in almost every country to claim rights, even if that was not perhaps the intention of the Security Council when they passed it. I hear all the time from those in the UN about the Women, Peace and Security Agenda that it's complicated to ensure women's participation. It's complicated to try and ensure that they are part of governance structures so that they can effect real prevention. Of course it's complicated, but that doesn't stop, must not stop them actually rethinking the way in which peace processes and governance is done more broadly. They always find a subtle way around to avoid that real participation. And I think that comes up very, very strongly throughout the report. What is absolutely true is that we have an agenda. It is there. It is law. We can use it. We must use it. It's our way of asserting the rights that must belong to all women everywhere, not least in the control of war and peace. And I think it's just been so brilliant to see how women in the MENA region have continued to do this against all odds, against doors being shut in their faces and doing what Rasha says, don't wait for an invitation. No one is waiting for an invitation. And that is why I think that in the next few years, we will find ways of making this agenda really work for us. So over to you to explain exactly what is happening and then how we can affect change. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Madeleine, and I'm very glad we got you back on Zoom. Moving swiftly, I will turn to the author of this policy, Mirfat Rishmawi, who will briefly go through its methodology, its main focuses and findings. Thank you, Mervat.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madeleine, for the opening words, which I think puts everything in perspective. And this is exactly what we try to do in this policy brief, is really discover what is working and what is not working, and to make sure that we have an agenda that we can work with, that we can go forward sorry, with. So I was honored to be asked to work on this policy brief. And while I have been working on the Women, Peace and Security for a while, it really opened my eyes to new issues, to new perspectives. So I was honored, really, and thank you, Wilf, for asking me to do that. So what I've done here is started by analyzing the Security Council resolutions. And in my previous work, what I normally did is to take the Security Council resolutions and try to see how we utilize the resolutions and the recommendations. But this time I tried to analyze and see, are there gaps? Are there issues that they are missing? Are there, is it divorced? Is it far from reality on the ground? So on one hand, I analyzed the Security Council resolutions and their recommendations. And then we had the interviews also with experts from the region, from feminist experts from the region. Some of them are here and they will be much better than me telling all of us what they see. And compared the two together. This was complemented, obviously, with some literature review, including some literature by these experts and some literature from the region itself and from WILPF. Through that, I was able to identify, as I said, gaps, issues that need, some need for a change of track, some need for highlighting new issues, missing issues, and so on. And then, obviously, at the end, there are some recommendations in the report. So the report focuses on different sections, different issues: participation, militarization and its impact on women and girls, and accountability. Then there is a section on new or additional issues that the Security Council and states and member states need to consider. And then, as I said, there are recommendations. I will start here with a focus on participation, and then maybe later on I'll come back to some of the other issues. So I'll give some examples of the approach of the Security Council and what is missing in the approach. Initially, we see that participation in the Security Council, and this comes so clear in the literature, in the global report, in all kinds of reports from the region and so on. It really focuses on conflict, post-conflict, and peace building. Most of the Security Council resolution recommendations focus on participation of women in these areas, not participation of women during peacetime, as if there is nothing that women can do and they are doing during peacetime. As we know, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is an agenda that relates to peacetime, during conflict, conflict resolution, and post-conflict. So what are the recommendations on peacetime? What is the Security Council saying and doing about the participation of women during peacetime? Hardly anything, really. Then we see that when discussing this issue with the feminists and activists in the region, it was striking that almost every single one of them focused on the importance of participation of women in political parties, trade unions, the public space, in the economy, and so on and so forth during peacetime. Every single one of them. And said that these are the areas that we are working on, in addition to working on the issues of participation during conflict and so on. So that's totally missing from the approach of the Security Council. Then there is the issue that participation, even if we take the participation of women during conflict and conflict resolution, it's not only about peace talks. And women have highlighted that. It's multifaceted. There are many issues that women work on and participate in during the conflict that the Security Council does not focus on. For example, does not focus on changing and strengthened role of women when the social structures and state are weakened or collapsing. And I'm sure Rasha and Maria will talk a lot about that. They have so many great examples that they can share. So Security Council does not even, it's not only that does not acknowledge that, but does not support that as well. And member states are hardly doing anything in supporting these local peace initiatives by women. Then when you see the words of the Security Council, it talks a lot about leaders, women representatives. Fine. Then this is a focus on numbers, on few women, the numerical approach. But we know from experience that the numerical approach does not work all of the time. What is the guarantee that these women are really carriers of the feminist, the needs of the women on the ground? There is no guarantee. The Security Council does not push that agenda forward, does not push forward the importance of having these representatives as real representatives of women, as real representatives of the needs and issues of the women on the ground. States don't work on that. Not only the Security Council itself, but states in their women, peace and security agenda work on the ground. Don't work on that, don't emphasize that. So there is no emphasis on the local level. There's this assumption that all women representatives are great. All women, the numerical representation is the solution for everything. And all the interviews have emphasized that, yeah, this is good because it changes the mentality of the society. We need women to be representative in the public space and to be represented in the public space and so on. It changes the society and so on. We need women to be in the public space before conflict, in all the areas before conflict, so that when it comes to the time of conflict, we don't really have to push for that, and we don't really have to fight for women to be put on the negotiating teams to be represented in government. It becomes natural, it becomes normal, so that it starts from peacetime. This is why women, peace and security agenda is really an agenda for all times, and this is a really missing point in the work of states, of the Security Council. Finally, and I will conclude here, as you will see, the Women, Peace and Security Council resolution is missing a very important point, that participation is not a standalone pillar. And the literature, unfortunately, really unfortunately, has put participation as a standalone pillar. It's cross-cutting. It relates to protection. It relates to prevention. It relates to conflict resolution. It relates to post-conflict. It relates to everything. So unless we see participation all through in economy, in the social structures, in everything. We are really missing the point. And I think I will stop here, since I think the speakers from the region are much better placed than me to talk about the reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mervat, for walking us through the policy brief. I would like to start the discussion exactly with what you just touched on, participation and the focus of the Security Council on participation, mainly during conflict and post-conflict situation. I would like to hear from Maria Labde. Maria is a feminist from Syria who's been working on this topic for several years. What does participation mean to you, and how does it go beyond the context of conflict and beyond political participation?
Thank you very much, Sarah and Mervat, and thank you for Will for providing translation. I have prepared my notes in English, so I will be speaking in English, but I really appreciate that you have provided translation to Arabic, and that is very important to go forward a real participation, because we are used to speak about us in English without even providing translation to the women. So really, thank you very much. This is a very important step for us. I can't agree more with all what Mervat have spoke about it. However, I will limit my intervention about my experience during the conflict in Syria, when I have seen women creating oasis of peace and working to participate without having anyone listening. Unfortunately, we have seen that the international community most of the time have limited the meaning of participation to tools like trainings, consultations, but without having a real understanding of the challenge that women are facing to participate. Working toward having safe place, safe environment, sometimes support, any kind of support is very important. We have seen a wonderful woman who cannot participate sometimes because they cannot afford paying the transport, or they need also to build self-confidence. So in terms of tools, it is not enough. We need to understand what the challenge our women are facing to participate. But to know that all women are able to participate, because it's really true that we have seen in the agenda, or in the application of the agenda in Syria, that women have been seen into two different cases: women that need protection and women who participate. So as mentioned by Mervat, the participation is only seen important if it is about the political process, if it is about the peace talk. But women are participating in social and economic rights discussion every day, and it is why it is important to acknowledge this participation and to support it. Sometimes most of the civilians are not interested in the political process, because they know that it is about the Lord of War who are speaking about their own agenda, and not about the people agenda or the civilian agenda. Women are always speaking about the civilian agenda, and it is something that we need to keep in mind. So limiting the participation to peace talk is not enough. We need to mainstream women participation. We have seen women as teachers, but no women in high-level education systems in Syria during the conflict, even by institutions that have been supported by international community. Today, the alternative education system, we don't have enough women in decision making. That means that there is a lot of decisions that has been made that affect participation of girls in education. Today, with COVID-19, we have seen a lot of women as nurses, as doctors, but not enough women on decision-making space in terms of health in Syria. So if we don't mainstream women participation at all levels and in all sectors, we will not be able to have an effective participation on peace talk and post-conflict. That is my first point. Second, what we mean by participation is also listen to the need and priority of women. We know that a lot of women cannot participate, or they have other priority like documentation. We know, I'm quite sure that the very soon coming problems in Syria will be documentation. A lot of women, men and children don't have identity card, doesn't have marriage certificate. It is something that the women are continuously speaking about, but no one is listening. So participations, if we want to really include women, it's need to listen to their priority and not only ask them about what we think is the priority. That is very, very important. And as mentioned by Madeleine earlier, women are not waiting for invitation. They are already forming themselves within a wonderful group. We have Families for Freedom. We have Caesar families who are asking for justice in Syria. And here also we have a big gap within the Women and Peace agenda. It's speaking a lot about peace talk, but never about justice. Women are either protected or participating in peace talk, but they are not working on justice. And we have seen this today with all the justice and accountability work that has been done during, especially within the last 2 years, especially in 2020, that we don't have enough women that are working or are being asked to participate in justice and accountability process, because no one have seen all the challenge that the women who wanted to participate in justice and accountability process are facing. So women are not waiting for invitation, they are organizing themselves. And what we have seen also in Syria, that more you have women group working in different issues, from knitting to political participations, that means that you will have more women in public spheres, and that what will create a safe place for women to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie. That was very interesting. Thank you for underscoring this very important point that all types of participation need to be acknowledged and mainstreamed. I'm going to turn to Rasha now. Rasha, you have engaged with the UN mechanisms for a long time, and you have previously briefed the UN Security Council. What has been, in your experience, the Security Council's approach when it comes to participation? And could you talk to us a little bit about its direct impact on the conflict in Yemen?
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I want to thank Mervet for capturing our thoughts in the policy brief. And I could relate to everything that Maria said. We have so many similarities with Syria. To reflect from our perspective, well, in Yemen, we've always ranked last in terms of gender equality and participation. Generally, women's political participation was always less than 1%. However, we were able to achieve a breakthrough, especially post the Arab Spring, when women secured almost 30% in the national dialogue. And this was talked about as a huge success model of inclusion, because during the national dialogue, the women secured almost 30%, the youth secured almost 20%, there was geographical also representation quota, and because of women's quality participation in the national dialogue, they led the working groups. There was a huge human rights package and outcomes that were approved as part of the conference, including approving a quota of 30% that the government and the state have to use in all the state, whether appointed or elected positions. However, when the war escalated, we immediately saw that women were the first to be let go from the peace process. The UN, unfortunately, led process has excluded women since they started the negotiation process. They throw the blame to the parties throw the blame to the UN design. And we as women's movement, since 2014 and 2015, well, at the beginning we were not so organized because we were busy with the war, responding with the war and everything. but with time became more organized, and the feminist movement in Yemen grew into a maturity that we are able to mobilize, whether women who are political or independent, we are coming together to demand our rights. And an example of that is actually a current campaign that we are doing, which is hashtag No Women, No Government, because currently the government is negotiating the formation of a new government, and we have heard that there would be no women. And this would be the first in 20 years of Yemen's history that we will have a cabinet with no women. And so we are pushing to change that and to respect the national dialogue outcome. To come back to the role of the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council, during the national dialogue, before the national dialogue, their resolution's language for inclusion was very clear. They said inclusion in their resolution, inclusion of women, youth, civil society. They named the political entities that they need to be included. It was very clear language of inclusion. This is why the process was designed in response to that resolution, and this is how we secured. This is, of course, not the only reason why we secured our participation in the national dialogue. The reason is also because women led the Arab uprising in Yemen. They were in the squares calling for the change. It was because the women demanded the 30% quota. They went in delegations and they talked to the different political parties and to the UN envoy. It was because of the political parties' political will at the time to show themselves as modern and civil actors who are ready for a modern Yemen civil state. All of this has changed. Now, the design of the process, the UN design of the process is a traditional design of having a mediation between two actors. It is continuously not imposing any quotas, and this is, I spoke to the UN envoy in the beginning of his term, and I asked him about imposing a quota, and he was like, his response was, we're not going to impose a quota. They are too worried to upset the parties. They are appeasing the parties to try to bring them to the table because they are thinking it's a risk for the mediation process. But seriously, there was no official mediation or negotiation. Sorry, there was no negotiation in the last 2 years, only a few times where they met for a few days for consultations. This is not a negotiation process. So we cannot use the excuse of not bringing women as an excuse to exclude them. Because of this exclusion, and coming back to the UN Security Council, if you compare to the UN Security Council resolutions that came during the war in the beginning in 2015 and the years after, they were all very weak in terms of gender language. It was always talking about women's participation in the political dialogue in the later process, not the current peace process. And we have I was invited in Kuwait to support the peace negotiation that happened in 2016. Out of the four months of negotiations, we were 7 women invited to be there for 5 days. This is just to tell you the level of participation that was expected from women. The delegations themselves did not have any women. And the moment we came back from that experience, we felt like we need to be organized. We revived a coalition that we had. We called it the Women Solidarity Network. As I said, we come from different political and independent backgrounds. And the first thing for us was to send to the UN Security Council a national agenda on women, peace, and security. We developed it with 70 women leaders, and we shared it. And it highlighted, and for me, that's the framework for any state who wants to invest in Yemen. We are telling them what is our priorities and how they need to engage. And one of the key messages in our national agenda was the arms transfers, the arms flow, and the importance of addressing child recruitment and protection for women, etc. And also supporting a national action plan for women, peace, and security. The second step for us was to push for us to influence the UN Security Council. It wasn't until 2018, so 4 years after the war started, that I was invited as a briefer. Before me, there was a briefer, in 2017, so 3 years later. What I'm saying is the UN Security Council was late to start listening to the civil society. It took them 3 years to start to listen to the civil society. When I briefed the council in 2018, I laid for them a roadmap for peace for Yemen. It was consulted with 500 women, and we wrote for them clear things that they can intervene as state members on how to help our country. And the resolution that was passed after my briefing finally had a clear language of inclusion of women participation. But again, they said women and youth meaningful participation in political processes. Now, what happens is the interpretation when it goes back to the UN office and to the political parties engaging in the negotiation, when they hear political process, they say, oh, peace is different. Peace is something else. For me, peace is a political process. But for them, this is how they go around it. The other thing we hear is that the UN Security Council resolution is binding. We keep hearing this, that it is not binding. So what is the use of the UN Security Council if they cannot impose anything, any resolutions that they are issuing? I will stop here and I can maybe add later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for shedding light on that. I wanted to pick up exactly on what both you and Maria said about how listening to women's priorities is a huge part of participation. I'd like to delve a bit into the role of donors and how they can impact the work of civil society and women organizations. The policy brief illustrates how sometimes donors' priorities define the work of local civil society instead of supporting civil society organizations to set and further their own strategic work. Maria, could you expand on this idea of restrictive funding policies and how they affect the work of civil society organizations?
Yes, thank you. And I will try also to summarize with some recommendation. But just let me start maybe with the title of WILPF report, Bullet at Shepherd and Sugar. Actually, I think this sentence that I have been hearing from my colleague in besieged area in Syria, in Ghouta specifically, when civilians were besieged, they don't have access to food. The stories that I was hearing from my colleague, letting their children going to sleep without having anything to eat, because everything was, the price of everything was so high that people were not able to afford buying even a banana. Some children in besieged area in Syria didn't know what is banana. So, but they have bullet around them, because that bullet will have their way, will find their way to besieged area, but not the sugars, not the fruits. So I think it's very important for Security Council members to think when they are providing and producing arms that they can on the same time fund women and peace participation, and putting so much compliance rules and everything, while they are part of the systems that is providing arms to the conflict parties. So the besieged area today are completely destroyed. We have lost some of our colleagues. Most of them are physically safe today, but they are enduring a huge trauma. All these wonderful women leaders that I have known are today looking about everyday life needs, about the trauma, about their documents. So actually, international community have been supporting them when they were providing this work and their participation programs, but they haven't been considered as persons that need to be supported all the way. And it is how it has been looked for women participation in Syria, and I think everywhere as programs. We support programs, but we don't support real participation, because those women have been providing, as in Yemen, they have been providing advise, they have been providing recommendation on how a deal can be respected, that respect civilians need, can be done in Ghouta. But unfortunately, only the voice of the conflict party was heard and never the voice of the women and the civilians. So that is the first issue we have seen. We also have seen that, as I said, the bullets were easier to transfer to these areas than us transferring the salaries and the support material to our colleagues because of the over-compliance and anti-terrorist law. So yes, my colleagues were going to women's centers and their bombs, but the money would not arrive, but the money for the bombs were there. So we need really to rethink the whole process of funding and compliance. We need to set up dedicated budget and that prioritize feminist activists over INGO, and review how international community fund, so that the law and procedure and due diligence don't discriminate, and that there is a mutual shared responsibility on funders and women rights organizations to meet the criteria and due diligence, and it's not only the responsibilities of women groups. And there is excellent experience, like the Women League for Peace and Freedom, Feminist Global Fund for Women, Gvina Telegvina. There is excellent examples of feminist fund that we can learn and build from it. The international community or fund can also build advisory boards from women and girls from the front line, so they can have a better understanding of the reality. There is a lot of very small things that can be done, that by ensuring translation, not asking for the woman always to speak the language of the donor, to ensure your documents are in Arabic or in the language in the country you are working on, and finally recognize economic and social rights as rights. Also, it is not under a humanitarian program only. They need also to be part of participation programs as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for this very insightful intervention. Thank you for setting up this very real picture behind the title, Bullets Are Cheaper Than Sugar. WILPF recently published a report on COVID-19 and gender justice, bridges with some of the things that Maria was just talking about. It also expands on a theme that is very much present throughout this policy brief, which is the feminization of poverty in the MENA region. I'd like to turn to my colleague Rola to unpack this topic a bit. Rola, how has the weak or inadequate official response to the COVID-19 virus exacerbated the economic situation, and what impact this had on feminization of poverty in the region?
Thank you. Shukran كتير Sarah. Thanks everyone. Also, I prepared my notes in English, so I'll speak in English. Although, to answer your question, Sarah, let me start by sharing how the layers or the how governments have failed actually to respond to the compounded impact of the crisis across the MENA region, and as the COVID report that was recently launched, and as our partners and feminist activists in the region have shared with us, that most of the governments in the region have favored continuity of business and economic activities over the livelihood and safety of most vulnerable groups. So that's one aspect of the how this has failed, and then I will talk more about the impact of which, and then we'll dig deeper as to what were the root causes behind of all of these compounded elements on the feminization of poverty and the compounded economic impact. The imposed militarized actions is another layer. Partners in Iraq, for example, they mentioned that the way the government there, the federal government, imposed these curfews, and the use of militarized actions have imposed limitations of mobility. And the lockdown measures, they were not, they affected many groups, mostly women, who couldn't afford just to stay at home and be safe, because for them being safe and staying at home had another or completely different layers than what governments thought the implications are. They focused on central cities and the neglected rural areas, or marginalized areas, or marginalized villages, and that's where women, also reflecting on the experience of Iraq, but also other contexts and other countries. The women, they work in the agriculture, work in the farms. It's an extension to their care role and their reproductive role. So it's seen as their responsibility. However, they lacked all kinds of social protection, all kinds of insurance and of healthcare systems. The governments have also failed to respond to the mounting pressure on the healthcare systems and the institutions, and to support these systems. And this have been the case where in most of the partners' accounts in different countries, hospitals were the areas where the COVID or where the virus has spread. And that is something because of and now I will talk more about the pre-existing factors before COVID, where this situation and why the situation has been mounted and amplified. Before going into the root causes, I'll just share the results of these layers of the inadequacy of the governmental response. These layers have affected the increased rate of poverty, the increased rate of unemployment. These rates of poverty and unemployment have affected most groups, but mostly women. Women in conflict-affected settings were mostly affected because, in Iraq, out of 10 households, there are 7 of which, well, this is not the right percentage. I'll dig into my notes further, but women, they mark up most of the household they had most of the household in Yemen, in Iraq, and that's their engagement in the informal economy. The increased rate of poverty and feminization of poverty the increased rate of unemployment has been affected. Absence of economic security is another layer that threatened women who were first to be subjected to arbitrary dismissal, and because of the during the onset of the pandemic, particularly in the service sector or in other sectors where women represent the majority of workers. 15 to 30% of women surveyed in Iraq, for example, were engaged in income generating activities before COVID, and most of them have lost completely their source of income because of that. Most of the families who stopped working or who lost their income generating activities, they don't have savings that would last for a couple of months, maybe after the stop of the work. So it's just to imagine the layers and the compounded elements due to that. The groups that are most affected by the situation is I will speak slower. The groups mostly affected by the economic impact of the COVID are low-income families, women in the informal sector, women working in the agriculture, female head of households and single head of households, particularly widows, divorcees, female IDPs, who according to Oxfam study, they provide for 1 in 10 families in Iraq. So that's the exact percentage I was looking for. So let's just then imagine the situation for this group and the other groups. If we dig deeper now and look at how these, that if we look at COVID as an enabler and look at the situation now, its impact, and then trying to look at the root causes and to dig into what has caused all of this situation, we could see that we could find roots in the lack of the proper investment in the healthcare system pre-COVID.
we could find that the infrastructures that had serious structural problems and challenges before that, we could see the capitalist political economy and the state's corruption, and that has been shared by many partners in Libya and Iraq and Lebanon and in so many areas where corruption has been the case and is taking even new forms and layers. We could see the devastating impact of the ongoing war on that's the case of Iraq, of Libya, Syria, where the healthcare system has collapsed, has been targeted systematically by regimes and by all the warring partners. So that's another layer that should not be dismissed when talking about the impact of COVID. Domestic violence is another layer, and digging deeper, the patriarchy and all the male dominance, the way that has affected women's inability to access economic resources in general and be engaged in economic activities as a result. The double burdens is another layer, and this is yet another manifestation of the patriarchy and how the gender norms have been the case when, due to the lockdown, women's burdens have tripled, if not only doubled, and due to the need to take care of other family members, of everyone. Just they are at lockdown and in spaces, not to let alone see what kind of these spaces or houses are in shelters in IDP's region. In addition to the work in the agriculture sector, as I said, that is considered as part of women's chores in many of the countries, and they work free without any wages, without any security or any insurance or any social safety nets. As a conclusion, pre-existing economic disparities, feminization of poverty, and collapsed healthcare system, as well as the underlying structural causes and the dire consequences on human security, all of which has been exacerbated by the government, by the pandemic, and we cannot just look at the aftermath of the pandemic and the impact of which without looking at the pre-existing situation and pre-existing factors to address this in a holistic or more a holistic approach. I'll stop here. I want to thank you again, everyone, for this, and thank you so much.
Rola. It's very important, especially in our current context. Thank you for breaking down to us this phenomenon of feminization of poverty. Thank you for highlighting the root causes. I'd like to move swiftly now to the second main theme of this policy brief, and one of the main issues in the region, militarization and its impacts. The analysis made in the policy brief shows that militarization itself is not addressed as an issue in the Security Council's resolution. Mervat, what is the approach of the Security Council in regards to militarization, and what is the problem with that approach?
Thank you. And I'll start with the problem, actually. When you think about it, militarization is something that is clearly closely connected to women's peace and security, the peace and security of women and girls. However, when you look at the Security Council, the two main areas where I think the Security Council approached the issue of militarization was referring to the ATT, to the article that says, the Article 4 that says, consider the impact of on human rights in arms trade on human rights. And the other thing is demilitarization in post-conflict period. That's great. That's very useful. However, there are many big missing areas, and I will highlight a few things here. One is that if you look at military spending in our region, military spending in our region is one of the highest one of the highest in the world. When you compare that with spending for issues, for budgets for human rights like education, health, services that are needed for women, services that are needed for the community in general, military spending is so much higher, so much higher. Not only that, military spending is increasing, and spending for other issues, for human rights related areas, is decreasing. So that's one major area that the Security Council itself is totally silent on, and states are totally silent on. So we are not seeing anything that says that at least, okay, if the Security Council does not want to touch military spending itself, at least encourage spending over other areas, over human rights related areas. It doesn't touch on it because it doesn't see it as something that relates to women, peace, and security. And this is the mind, I don't know how you call it. It's like, I can't understand that the Security Council does not see that spending on education, on health, on services, and so on are very much part and parcel of the women, peace, and security agenda. So touch on that, talk about that, and that's totally absent from the Security Council agenda. Another point is that another point is that quite often you see the recommendation that focuses on the need for increasing number of women in the military and the security apparatus, and increasing number of women in peacekeeping. That's very good. Okay, peacekeeping is very good. However, increasing number of women in the military doesn't solve anything. It totally disregards the whole concept, the whole paradigm that militaries are the whole paradigm of military, that they work around violent resolution of conflicts. They do not create peace in the sense that they do not prevent peace in the first place. Militaries are not there to create human rights and human security in the first place. So the whole concept of military, of having a military, is to resolve conflict in a violent way. So the whole approach of the Security Council is just add more women to resolve conflicts in a violent way. And it's just, that does not relate to women, peace, and security. So I just found this a very strange approach of the Security Council. The third area that I would like to talk about is that the focus is very much, as I said, is military in its connection with conflict. However, there are many areas around militarization and armament that relate to peacetime. For example, we see that there is armament that is widespread among political groups, militias, tribes, and that even during peacetime, not only conflict, but peacetime, let's think about the peacetime, it's a huge threat to women's peace and security. Security Council is totally silent about that. I did not see much about that in the Security Council. And we have seen in the region the number of cases, the large number of cases of threats to women by different armed groups, by militias, by even the tribes, attacks around issues on issues around, for example, CEDAW, the whole issue of the feminist approaches that women organizations and human rights organizations are adopting. And the point is that the power of these tribes, the power of these militias, the power of these groups is basically based on them having weapons and holding that and using it when they need to. States are aware of that, but totally silent about it. And that's a very strange approach that the Security Council, again, does not see that as a threat to peace and security. The other side of it is of the militarization encroaching into the civilian space. In addition to what I just said, we have the example of Egypt, where the military is even encroaching into the economic sector and controlling the economic sector. And that is proving now by many studies to failing the economy of Egypt. But again, that is an issue that is not seen as something that relates to peace and security. So the whole issue of militarization within the civilian space, encroaching on the civilian space in any setting, whether it is peacetime, during conflict, and post-conflict, is not seen as a continuum in the approach of the Security Council. There is the other issue, and I think this is an issue that Russia actually talked about a lot in her interview, about arms in the civilian space, as I said, can only be a threat to women and girls' peace and security. But arms is not only in the hands of people, arms are also stored in civilian spaces. And so in the context of context of conflict, that becomes a huge threat to the civilians when arms are stored, as I said, in civilian spaces. They become targets, and targets that threat civilians, including women and girls. So again, that is not addressed by the Security Council. So I guess I will stop here in terms of the militarization. But the main point is that the Security Council does not really approach the issue of militarization, except in the context of the ATT, and that's only recently, and except in terms of disarmament in the context of post-conflict.
Thank you so much, Merfat, for underscoring the main problems in the Security Council's approach, and which are so important to understand in order to move forward in implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in the region. As we're moving towards the end of this discussion, I would like us to talk about where to go from here. Lack of accountability was a point that was repeatedly highlighted by the participants in this project. Rasha, could you expand a bit on lack of accountability mechanisms in the UN system and the impact this has on your work and your work with Peace Track Initiative?
Thank you, Sarah. As Peace Track Initiative, we are a relatively young organization that was institutionalized in 2017, but started really through informal volunteering efforts since 2015. And it was Yemeni women coming together inside and outside the country. Those outside the country are Yemeni women who are migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers to support the peace process. The first thing that we noticed, as we are all coming from a human rights defending backgrounds, is that when you move to peace building process, especially peace facilitation and mediation, you are pressured to compromise on accountability. Because you don't, what we kept hearing from track 1 and track 2 partners, the mediators and peace facilitators, is that we do not want to risk upsetting the conflict parties and the negotiation parties to come to the table. We have a different approach. When we started working, we decided to work with women because we consider women are the main agents for peace in Yemen. They are the ones holding the community together as everything collapses around them. The women we work with in the Women Solidarity Network are women who mediate for ending conflict and armed conflicts on water and land resources, women who were able to mediate and negotiate for a ceasefire, for example, in armed conflict areas, to evacuate families, women who risk their lives to tiptoe between mines to go and get food to trapped families and in crossfire lines. They are very brave women. And as we started working with these women who are risking their lives and are being so resilient, we noticed that they are also subject to a lot of threats, a lot of risks, and we decided to also add a component of protection. And for protection, we do two things. We document the violations and abuse against women from all backgrounds, and also we support specifically women human rights defenders and women peacemakers with protection grants to help them either relocate, either psychosocial support, or have legal aid if they need to. They define what is their needs and we support them. What we noticed, what we did also is to link the women human rights defenders with the international accountability mechanisms, whether that is formed by the UN Security Council. In our case, we have the Sanction Committee and the panel of experts for the Sanction Committee. And also we have the group of eminent experts that is formed by the Human Rights Council. And frankly, these two committees that were formed by the Human Rights Council and by the UN Security Council were something that that is working on documenting, but they are not reaching the accountability phase yet. So they are good at documenting what is happening, but we are not really seeing what is happening to the perpetrators. We already have lists because of our work on connecting women to these mechanisms. They were able to report on issues that are in Yemen considered huge social stigma and that are not easy to report on, such as sexual and gender-based violence, child recruitment issues, and other violations. Because of this, because of the strong reporting as well, earlier this year, the sexual and gender-based violence and child recruitment were actually added to the sanction list. The sanction list has people who are blocking the peace process, people who transfer arms, and then now it is added the sexual and gender-based violence and child recruitment issues. Now we have a list with these perpetrators. What's next? We don't know what's next. We don't see mechanisms on the actual justice and accountability that comes after this process. So we want to push for the next level of justice, but also what I noticed is, for example, for the group of eminent experts, when their mandate was being developed, the main focus was to have the accountability mandate. So they have to document in a view to reach accountability and to name the perpetrators when possible. But as civil society, we were also pushing for reparation. We wanted the language of reparation to be included in the resolutions related to the Human Rights Council. It was always being dropped. And this is alarming because for us, yes, accountability is great. Yes, prosecution of perpetrators is great, but we also need reparation for the people who have suffered and went through devastating violations and abuses. The other thing is, what we noticed is we have, when we supported women's inclusion in the peace process, as Madeline said in the beginning, that we decided that we're not going to wait for invitation. We're going to claim the space. We're going to send our own delegations to the peace processes. We're going to get the drafts of the peace process. We tried to get it formally from the UN envoy office. They would always refuse. We will get it informally. We will write our recommendations. We will discuss with the women and we will share with them. And what I noticed is that when we used to share the information quietly, the information will go into a drawer somewhere and it will not have an impact. But at once we decided that we're going to publish the peace agreement with our notes. We published it. And because of that, we noticed that the second draft actually included our recommendations. And so when we have an accountable peace process, when there is a spotlight on what we do, this is how we can change things. But sometimes in the name of confidentiality or sensitivity, you can actually be compromising on accountability. So, and what we push for is an accountable, inclusive, and local peace. And I want to say local peace. Why? Because all of these mechanisms that the UN Security Council have formed, whether it is the UN Peace Mission, and the UN Special Envoy mission, whether it is the UN mission on Hodeidah Agreement, or the UN Verification Mission, which is the main mission that is monitoring the arms embargo in Yemen. Today, when we evaluate 6 years later of the war, what they have done and how much money was spent on these missions, there is nothing that they can account for. The arms flow is still happening, although we have a verification. I think the verification only obstructs the humanitarian and the food and the commodities and the commercial. Oh, they are trying to make it faster, but it became an embargo, a collective punishment to the people, rather than really stopping the arms, because the arms are still flowing. How is the armed groups getting arms if we have a verification mechanism? For the Hodeidah mission, nothing from what they were formed. They had an annual budget of $50 million a year. This is just the operational budget without the activity budget. And there was nothing that has been done from the things that were set out for them to do. At one point, I was calling about the misappropriation of funds when they were using a ship as their main accommodation, with a rent cost of $800,000 a month for almost more even than a year. So, and for the UN Envoy Office, they had, for example, last year or this year, their budget is $18 million. What is their biggest achievement? Their biggest achievement this year, that they were able to do a prisoners exchange of 1,081 persons. This was the result of a negotiation process of more than 2 years to free 1,000 men plus. And if you compare to what the women did, the women were able to release almost that number without $18 million. So we have to assess how much the resources that are spent in multilateral UN mechanisms that result in nothing, and then assess what the civil society is doing with limited resources and how they are really creating change. And I will just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for this. Mervat, in addition to accountability mechanisms, what else is missing in the Security Council resolutions? What new or added approaches would we like to see?
A lot. There's so much that we have talked about here that we would like to see. I will start from Russia's last points. There is a huge divorce or separation between the approach of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in the resolutions of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and the counter resolutions. Russia gave so many great examples of how the Women, Peace and Security Agenda talks about participation of women. However, in reality, it doesn't work. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda, the resolutions themselves ask the envoys and representatives to work on that, to ensure that, and so on. They don't do that, and so on and so forth. Russia really explained that greatly, so I'm not going to expand on that, but that's one huge area that is missing and needs a lot of work. The other major area is occupation. The word occupation does not figure even once in any of the resolutions, as if occupation is not a threat to women's peace and security, as if the whole existence of occupation is not a threat to women's peace and security, let alone the rest of the population. So CEDAW committee was very clear on that in general recommendation 30, in other general recommendations on violence and gender-based violence and so on, talked about occupation as a threat. to Women's Peace and Security, but not the Security Council. And that's one major area that is totally missing and really needs to be rectified. The other major area is that when I was reading the Security Council resolutions and I was looking at how the resolutions approach the issue of civil society, it's basically as service delivery. So civil society is a service delivery organizations, and two, they talk about the role of the civil society in relation to ensuring and supporting women's participation. Today, in all our discussion, we've heard about so many areas about the work of the civil society internationally, regionally, locally, nationally, and so on, in so many areas, not only in terms of participation, economic, whatever, I mean, so many areas. So the Security Council is totally not aware of that, does not reflect that, and so on. There's one area that was great about the Security Council lately. The resolution started talking about the need for secure space for civil society, and that was great. But that needs to be a secure space for civil society and the safe environment for civil society in all its work, not only in relation to women, peace, and security, in relation to conflict resolution and post-conflict. It has to be across the board. Then I may possibly conclude with just emphasizing that the Women, Peace, and Security agenda is an agenda that is across the board, that is at all times, that is, it doesn't relate only to conflict, and the resolutions are so much focusing on conflict and conflict resolution and post-conflict. But what about peacetime? What about conflict? What about all other areas during conflict, not only in relation to participation, but all other areas during conflict? So the Women, Peace, and Security agenda has to be seen as an agenda that cuts across, that relates to all countries, that relates to all situations. Rula's examples of the COVID-19 and the report is a great example of how Women, Peace, and Security agenda is relevant in this particular context as well. It doesn't have to wait for a conflict. It really does not have to wait for a conflict. We can work now. All countries that are still in peace can work now to prevent conflict and to put in place all kinds of laws, institutions, preventative measures, and so on, so that we don't end up in conflict and have to resolve conflict after that. So that's, I find, very big area missing from the resolutions. And thank you here for this opportunity, and I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mervat, and thank you for highlighting the issue of occupation as well. We don't seem to have any questions from the floor, so perhaps I would turn to our speakers again. If Maria Labde would be willing to answer a question to reiterate a key message or a recommendation on a healthy relationship between donors and civil society organizations.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Rasha and Mervat. Like sharing all this experience was so inspiring, and we felt how much we are all facing the same challenges. So I think I will repeat it again. We need to widen the meaning of participation if we really believe that it is important, and it is not only for purpose or of doing what is written. Madeleine have mentioned that it is complicated. Yes, participation is complicated. Being inclusive is complicated. It's way easier to be a dictator than being a democrat. But if we really want to build sustainable peace in the area, we need to go through complicated ways that are way less complicated than waiting for another conflict, and way cheaper than buying all the bullets and the arms. So we need to have this as a principle, mainstreaming women participations, finding ways to facilitate funding them, women groups, working on over compliance, sharing responsibilities and sharing risk. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. Rasha, do you want to give one recommendation to the UN Security Council? If you could just choose one, if you could reiterate one key message.
Okay, thank you. We need to move away from the colonized peace processes into a more nationalized, nationally owned, inclusive and accountable peace processes, and supporting and believing in women. They are really the change agents, and they are going to realize the peace process. I'm too tired that I am in the 21st century still convincing men in higher powers that we have the right to be in the table, questioning our right to be at the table. So we need to change this, and this change comes from the leadership. They have to walk the talk, and take really measurable actions, not only beautiful statements that we hear of support, but it needs to be converted into measurable actions in terms of inclusion and inclusive peace. Thank you.
You're welcome, Rasha. Madeleine, do you want to have a last word before we do closing remarks?
Well, I certainly don't think I should have the last word. But just to say, that as a note, maybe a bit of positivism, because I think what you have been talking about on this panel is so right. And you have completely really described exactly what the situation, exactly what needs to be done, where the problems are and how to fix them. I think for me, what I've found over the last, God knows how many years that I've been doing this work, I have never heard so many women from so many different parts of the world saying the same thing. It's as if finally we do actually have a common ground in terms of we are all talking about militarism. I've never heard so much talk about arms trading. I've never heard so much talk about the complete failures of the Security Council to understand what really needs to happen and the absolutely vital importance of not just them ensuring women are there, but women taking control to be there. And I think, Rasha, you started the revolution with your "don't wait for an invitation" remark, because that is really what we have to be doing. And it's getting picked up. And so it's not just in the MENA region. I'm hearing it from when we have webinars which involve the African region, whether it be Southeast Asia. I think women have had enough. You know, we've been listening to this nonsense, and we've been playing the game for so long with structures which are inimical to our real abilities to make those fundamental changes. And I think we're getting there. I really honestly think we're getting there, because I'm hearing it from the likes of the activists on the ground who are doing the work, really articulate it in ways which will bring fundamental change. So I am ridiculously optimistic given what's just happened in this year. But it's almost as if we have found ways of being together and actually building this movement. And I'm really encouraged that we're watching the ending, the beginning of an ending. And let's hope that we are able to achieve that before worse happens. But I think we can do this. And it's really inspirational to have you guys taking the lead on it, I tell you.
Thank you, Madeleine. I really like your optimism. And yeah, this is amazing. We're not late on time or anything. I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists for their time and for sharing their analysis and knowledge, and to all the partners and activists who have taken part in the consultations that led to this paper, including the ones that couldn't be here today. Also, a big thank you to Mervat Rishmawi for her policy brief, to the WILPF MENA team, to the WILPF's comms team, to all those who supported and were involved in this project, to our brilliant interpreters, to our designer, and to you all for your time. I just want to make a quick announcement before we go. So following the COVID-19 report launch, and in response to partners' recommendations, WILPF has started a series of webinars and meetings. This webinar was part of this series. The next webinar will be a joint panel at the Men Engage Ubuntu Symposium on January 14, 2021. So please monitor our Facebook page and WILPF's website to know more about our upcoming online engagements. This event will be available on those platforms very soon as well. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful evening or day, depending on your time zone. Thank you.